Hello, I'm Matthew Shribman and welcome to AimHi, the nature first, curiosity powered online school where our mission is to make world-class live learning accessible for all. Today's AimHi lesson welcomes a guest organisation called ZooLab, which is very cool. They are working to bring people closer to nature, and today they're bringing to AimHi a load of fascinating invertebrates. As a general rule, my feeling is that nature is best left alone and given space to be wild. However, when it comes to invertebrates, as far as we understand, they have no stress response to being gently handled by people who know what they're doing. And that's why we've decided to run this live lesson today, with hope of bringing our learners into closer contact with some of the beautiful nature that exists on planet Earth. So thank you for coming, and please welcome Georgie Jefferies, who holds a BSc in animal science and has worked with animals from Trinidad to South Africa and is now the lead science presenter at ZooLab. Hi Georgie, we are really happy to have you.
Hello, good morning Matthew. Now today we're going to be talking about animal species in particular, and if we break down our animal species into two main groups to start with, on the planet there are recorded 1.25 million species. If we break them into invertebrates and vertebrates, so if they have a backbone or they don't have a backbone, invertebrates being the ones without backbone, which do we think we have more of? Now, actually, 97% of species on our planet are actually invertebrates. Anything from insects to arachnids, so your spiders, your scorpions, mollusks, starfish, jellyfish. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So I'll show you this. This is a trace fossil. Now, trace fossils are the ones that are mostly found with trilobites because soft tissue doesn't tend to fossilize very well, but trilobites have exoskeletons, and it's the exoskeleton when it's shed that tends to fossilize, and it has something called chitin in it, which again we'll talk about a bit later with some of the things I'm going to show you, and it's that fossilizes. So most of the fossils are actually trace fossils, what we call not the actual animal itself, but the remnants of something it's shed off its body. Have a look at the eyes. So on the slide, you can see those eyes there. They have compound eyes. And it was only a few years ago, scientists actually discovered a fossil that had the eyes present on a trace fossil, and it was the bacteria that built up over time that actually had fossilized the eye, which allowed them to realize that this was actually a compound eye that our modern insects have today. So this was a primitive version of it. So if we did an evaluation of our eyes and compound eyes, they see the world, it's like a mosaic. So you can see on this picture here, there's lots of lenses, and they're called omatidia, and each lens sees the picture, but not in as much detail and as much great quality, but it does see about 360 degrees. So although the acuity is not as great as our eye, it serves its purpose for what they need, looking out for predators and prey around them, having all these lenses, and it allows a quick response. So a fly is very similar, and a dragonfly is obviously hunting on the wing. They have 30,000 of those lenses on their eyes, dragonflies do. So much a much quicker able response. Our eyes have just the one lens. Worth bearing in mind as well that compound eyes, some insects can see in the ultraviolet spectrum, which we can't see it. So they see hues that we don't see, but they don't have the quality so much that we would see. So I think it's time for us to look at some animals, don't you? We're going to have a look at a tarantula. She's called Rosie. She's a Chilean rose tarantula. So this is Rosie. So she would live in the forests in Chile, so it's more dry, sort of temperate forest. And of course, she's an arachnid. She has 8 legs. How many eyes do we think she has? By the way, arachnids don't have the compound eyes. That's the insects. So she's got 8 eyes, actually, and her eyes are in this spot. I'm going to bring to the corner of the screen so you can find the spot. There you go. That's where all of her 8 eyes are, in that spot in the corner of the screen. There we go. You see there? So that's where all of her 8 eyes are. But their eyesight is not really that great. They have another method of detecting things around them. Let's see if anybody knows what that is. By the way, while we're waiting, I'm just going to turn her around because something pretty exciting she's doing right now. We're very lucky. Can you see on the side at the back there, those things sticking up? They are her spinnerets. And that's where she spins her silk from, her spinnerets on the base of her abdomen. So you see this sticking up on the end?
So they normally tucked away?
So she'll have them laid up at the back of her body, sort of tucked up like this. She was spinning when I first got her out, and she's actually, there's some silk here. You can see that or not. There we go. She's actually been spinning some spider silk there. Spider silk, by the way, is one of the strongest materials. Well, notice she's really hairy. She doesn't need a razor. Those hairs are really, really important to her. On her legs, they're called setae, these hairs, and they detect vibrations. So if something was coming towards her, she would feel the vibrations through that. And they can detect just the movement of insects. It's just slight. It's just absolutely incredible the amount of pressure applied and how she can feel that through those hairs. She has hairs as well on her abdomen. If we turn around and have a look, the hairs on her abdomen are there for a different reason. That's a defense mechanism. So if a bird, say, because a main predator of hers would be birds, would pick her up, maybe start getting ready to eat her, she could rub her back legs on her abdomen and flick her hairs off. Now, if you looked at each one of those hairs under a microscope, each one has a barb that goes backwards, and it would embed in the skin of that animal, and it would make them really itch and scratch. It's really quite unpleasant. So that's her method of defense. Meanwhile, while the bird or the animal is sorting itself out, Rosie here gets to get away. So those hairs are her defense. She gets a bald patch, but it grows back. It grows back within sort of 3 to 4 weeks, because obviously if she was completely bald, she's incredibly vulnerable at that point. So those hairs are really important to her. So defense and vibrations as well. I'm going to show you a skin shed of a tarantula. So I'm going to pop Rosie back now. She's done her bit. So she's an invertebrate, we know that. She doesn't have a spine, she doesn't have a backbone, but she has an exoskeleton. So she has, like our trilobites, she has an exoskeleton on the outside. So when you've got a bit like a suit of armour on the outside and you grow, obviously that gets really tight. So it has to come off, it has to shed. And that's called, the molt is called an exuviae, which is what we're going to look at now. And the process is called ecdysis. And it's a bit like how the process is in our body. Our brain stimulates a hormone for that to happen. It's exactly the same. Now, can you see this part underneath here? This is what we call the carapace. So the top part of the tarantula's body where you saw the eyes when I actually showed you the real tarantula. So this comes unhinged like a trap door all the way around, and our tarantula pulls out of it. Now, this process can take sometimes 24, 30 hours. So what happens is when they're about to molt, they usually build a web on the ground like a blanket. It's nice and dry. They don't want it to be too wet when this happens, because that can be the difference between a good molt and a bad molt. A bad molt can mean that the tarantula dies in that process. So they need it to be pretty dry. They'll sit there for a while and they go really still. You think something's wrong with them because they almost just don't move at all, but they're going through this process. And then they flip on their back. You think something's seriously wrong, but then they flip back up this way, and they're basically loosening this exoskeleton, pull themselves out of it, and release themselves out of it. They're really vulnerable at this point. Their exoskeleton is really soft and wet, so they go and hide under a tree root and they wait and for this to harden. This exoskeleton hardens, and then about a day or so later, they can emerge again and continue. But during their lifetime, this can happen sort of 5 to 6 times until they're fully grown, and then it will happen a lot less often when they are fully grown. So those fangs obviously contain venom. Now, I think one of the questions you had come through was how dangerous are tarantulas? Well, tarantulas are actually not as bad as we think. We're more scared of them because they're big and hairy and they don't look the nicest of animals to be around. But the spiders to worry about, the spiders that can cause you some serious harm or death, are more tropical spiders rather than tarantulas. There is an element of risk with tarantulas because obviously if you were allergic to it, you only know that when it happens. So there is arguably an element of risk. But generally, if I was to get bitten by a tarantula, it would be like a bad bee or wasp sting. It'd be sore for sure, and I might feel a little bit weird. But after about a day or so, I should be okay. But generally, the spiders to worry about, you probably heard of the Brazilian wandering spider or the brown recluse spider. So they're these spiders that are in the top 10 list of dangerous spiders. Now, the Brazilian wandering spider, we know it's a banana spider. It tends to lay eggs in bananas. Those spiders have neurotoxins in their venom, and that can go straight to your central nervous system, and they're the ones that can cause you serious harm. But our tarantulas are not really as bad as we think. Okay, let's talk insects now. This is a giant lime stick insect, and you find it in Grenada and the Caribbean, some of the islands around there. Let's have a look at that eye as much as we can, up close. So you might be able to see, that's the beauty of these larger insects. You can see in much more detail than our insects. And there are lots of lenses on those eyes. So able to see the world in a completely different way than we do. Now, all these invertebrates occupy their own niche in the habitat that they live in. And I've got a good example here with a stick insect. So look at the colour of this incredible stick insect here. Obviously, I've got a rainforest backdrop behind me, and the leaves generally in the rainforest tend to be a little bit more lime green than perhaps the leaves on the trees in our country. And if we pop our stick, I'm going to pop our stick insect up here. Now, on the end of those legs are incredible hooks. So you can see this is basically a shower curtain, guys, behind me. Okay, so these are incredible hooks, and you can see how well it's holding on. And suddenly, you guys know it's there, so we can see it, of course. But if you didn't know it was there and we were just walking through the rainforest, you're going to struggle to see that because, of course, during the day, they're going to be very still. We're going to look at a different stick insect now. This one comes from Papua New Guinea, and its niche in the rainforest is the forest floor. This one's slightly more scary looking, actually. People don't tend to be so keen on this one as much.
It's not gone through the rebrand.
But this one lives lower down in the rainforest, so in the forest floor, amongst the tree roots, and during the day, will go under bark, leaf litter, and look like a broken branch, broken twig, and look just like that other stick insect. You can see the compound eyes and hooks on the end of the legs. You see those hooks? So these are adaptations for living in the rainforest. Spines for protection. You can see them on the legs, these barbs. These are actually quite prickly, this sort of stick insect. This stick insect on a tree trunk. Suddenly we've got a stick insect that occupies a completely different niche. So that just shows you how these species evolve and change their characteristics, their adaptations to suit the environment they live in. And there can be environmental pressures such as predators, environment to camouflage. So going back to our giant lime, the giant lime stick insect you saw. So I'm going to show you I've got some youngsters here, some juveniles. So this one here is literally a few days old. So you saw the giant lime just now.
Couldn't see them before.
That's a youngster. This one is gone through. There we go. There's two there. So you see the other one? It's gone through about 2 instars now. So an instar are the stages between shedding their exoskeleton. I'm just going to get this youngster because he's pretty speedy. Put you back. So this one has gone through a couple of stages of shedding its exoskeleton. So about 5 to 6 stages, and then it will be the size of the giant lime that you saw. It's pretty incredible, isn't it? And if we have a look at some of the eggs, so the eggs are a bit like, I suppose, large grains of rice. And they've got like a cap on the end, which literally just unhinges, basically. So they need to be kept in a warm temperature, obviously, in the rainforest. Sorry, did you see that? Yeah. In the rainforest, they would be sort of 25 degrees under the soil. They drill that ovipositor under the soil, deposit this egg, and then, depending on the species, is the length of time that incubation takes place. But it could be 6 weeks, it could be 2 months. With the giant limes, it's quite long. There's a lot of that insect's quite a complex insect, so there's quite a lot to happen in that egg. I'm going to show you a mystery invertebrate now. It's pretty small. Anybody want to have a guess what that is? It's called a tailless whip scorpion. Now, going back to our trilobites, obviously, they have a relative in scorpions and spiders, and these are in a sort of subgroup, if you like. So there's no tail, it's not like a scorpion that we are familiar with. And you can see these really long antennae, and they are sensory, they're for feeling. They're much bigger than their body, and they literally whip them around to sense around them. And if we look really close, the front legs, I'm going to hold really close now. Can you see? It's a bit like a praying mantis. These adaptations of these claws on the front, and what they do is they don't have venom, so they literally grab their prey and just almost start chewing it. Not very nice feeders, a bit like similar to a scorpion in a way. But they're actually harmless to any other animals because there's no venom. So they're not harmless to their prey, of course, but to anything bigger, there's nothing really they can do to defend themselves other than crawl under small rocks and hide and be great camouflage. You saw how great that camouflage was. We got any more questions?
Should we go to the final bits of Q&A?
Yeah, let's do that, shall we?
Okay, so firstly, insects have quite brutal deaths. What's your feeling about that compared to, like, the deaths of mammals in the wild?
Yeah, they do. That's very true compared to... But I suppose if you think about the vertebrate world, we do have some quite brutal... If you think about sort of hyenas, they just sort of scavenge things and will start eating them alive. Even rats will eat other animals alive as well. They're not very nice. But invertebrates, going back to what you were saying right at the beginning, invertebrates, for us as humans, as a society, we because they don't have a central nervous system like us, they don't experience pain as far as we're aware as we do. So it's very controversial, but vertebrates experience pain as we know it, but invertebrates, because they have a brain, they have nerve ganglions, but we've decided that they don't experience pain as we do. And so, unfortunately, they don't get the welfare regulations in place that vertebrates would do. For example, to give you an idea, if I was to feed, I've got snakes, I've got some vertebrates as well. If I was to feed my snakes, I would need to feed my snakes mice. And we have to feed mice already dead to the snakes. That's what we have to do in our country, because the argument is if you're giving a live animal to a snake, it hasn't got the opportunity to get away. And that's not okay. Although it would feed on that in the wild, you're putting it in a tank, so it's not. So we would have to feed dead mice. But with my tarantula, I feed my tarantula a live cricket. We are allowed to do that, and that's because of this. With invertebrates, because they're lower animals, we don't class them as having the same experience of pain. But going back to how important our invertebrates are, so let's turn this around a little bit. How important are invertebrates to us? Why are invertebrates so important to us as humans? Let's throw that question.
So Ray is saying regulating soils and nutrient cycling, and Fatima is saying pollinating. As another thing that insects do.
But yeah, they're important for pollination. 80% of our crops in Europe are pollinated by insects. And it's about just learning how important they are and how we can protect them by planting wildflowers and putting out bug hotels and not mowing your lawn. Not mowing your lawn means dandelions will grow. That's a source of nectar for bees and therefore for other invertebrates to lay their eggs. And little things that we can do, just little changes, will have an impact on sustaining our invertebrates, because I'm sure you'll be aware that many of them are threatened by environmental issues.
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Georgie from ZooLab for being here. Farewell all, and thank you for coming. Bye all.